Pablo Picasso was born in Malaga on the Mediterranean coast of Spain in 1881. He was able to draw before he could speak, and supposedly the first word he spoke was the Spanish for pencil. His work is instantly recognizable, often compared to a child's with eyes in the wrong places and noses sticking out in strange directions. But it still manages to sell quite well. This one, called Dora Maar with a cat, went for $95 million. Picasso chose to paint like this, despite the fact that he could paint like this by the time he was 16. Instead, he spent his life restlessly innovating, ripping apart conventional art and shocking the world. So why did he do it? And does it matter to us today that he went all Picasso? In searching for his own artistic voice, Picasso dug deeper and deeper into his Spanish past, and he became fascinated by the crude severity of ancient Spanish sculptures just like these. In 1906, he visited the Louvre, where some of these carved heads had gone on display after being found in southern Spain. Now, Picasso, of course, was born in Malaga in southern Spain, so if he could lay claim to any ancient artefact as his inheritance, then it was Iberian heads just like these. And if you have a look at their really heavy, bulging eyelids and massive, oversized ears, you realise that these offered Picasso an alternative and quite exciting new way to represent the world afresh, in contrast to the age-old academic tradition of simply imitating nature. Iberian heads like these gave Picasso the chance to experiment. The result was this portrait of the writer and art collector Gertrude Stein. The face a smooth mask, the forehead protruding, the eyes chiselled. Radical by the standards of the day, but Picasso was just getting going. It wasn't just ancient Spanish heads that inspired Picasso. One day, probably in the summer of 1907, he was blown away by a collection of African masks, a bit like this one, that he saw in a museum in Paris. These tribal objects crackled with a raw, primitive power that instantly bewitched him. They were nothing short of a revelation. In the 1800s, conventional art like this, when even of a brothel, was precise, polite, and rather restrained. But Picasso wanted to convey the lurid, carnal harshness of the brothels that he knew only too well. To do this, he abandoned 600 years of artistic refinement. Inspired by the African masks, he shut himself in his studio for months, finally emerging with this. This painting is the out-and-out breakthrough of Picasso's life. This is the foundation stone on which his whole reputation rests. And you might be thinking, why? I mean, Picasso had proven that he could paint in this beautifully realistic manner before, and then all of a sudden, you see this. And I think part of the reason it's so powerful is because Picasso really believed that painting, that art, should never be polite. All of a sudden, it's like you've wandered into the brothel, and here are these 5 prostitutes, and all of them have got that Gorgon stare. They're like monsters. Look at them with their eyes. And in a way, it's like you've suddenly been caught out. Previously, in Western art, it would be fine to have a look at a painting of a beautiful woman lying there, and she'd be sort of, quite helpfully, just probably there with her eyes shut, and you could happily feast on her form. But here, it's suddenly like, oh, actually, hang on, I've been caught looking and staring. It's got this frenzied, almost diabolical energy. There's something raw about this, and that rawness is what lends it that visceral edge. Picasso believed that art now had to do something much more. He wanted it to communicate everything we know and feel about an object, not just show us how it looks from one vantage point at one moment in time. He started collaborating with another radical painter, Georges Braque, comparing themselves to the aviation pioneers, the Wright brothers. They took a sledgehammer to conventional pictorial art, and what they pieced together from the fragments
is called Cubism, said to be the most momentous innovation in art since the development of perspective.
Picasso painted this in 1910, and in terms of subject matter, it's pretty conventional. You're looking at a woman playing a mandolin, but the way that he's painted her is anything but. This is such a radical departure from what he was doing even 2 years before, and it represents all the hallmarks of his new Cubist style. So the picture's really flattened, perspective doesn't seem to exist, and look at the way that he's fracturing and fragmenting the forms, so that the whole thing looks like a pane of shattered glass. Here, for example, you see the woman's shoulder, but you sort of see over into her back at the same time. And the point is that Picasso's trying to create these multiple viewpoints all at once.
Over the next few years, Braque and Picasso pushed their deconstruction of reality further and further.
This is another painting of a woman with a guitar, but I'd forgive you if you thought, I really can't see that at all. You can just about make out here, there's an elbow, and I think those are supposed to be a few fingers, and there are the strings of the instrument. But the point here is that Picasso is ditched representation altogether. The process of fracturing and fragmenting form has been taken to its completion, really, and the woman has dissolved into the surface altogether. She's hidden. He said that he wasn't really creating a reality that you could hold in your hands. It was more like capturing the essence of a perfume, something that was in front of you, behind you, to the sides, all at once.
The almost complete distortion of the thing being painted was radically, provocatively new. With Cubism, Picasso threw open the doors to abstract art, and in the future, many artists wouldn't even bother with a subject at all. Cubism was a hit with many powerful dealers and collectors, making Picasso increasingly wealthy. The sharp angles and hard lines felt mathematical, technological, scientific, just like the modern world. So it could be said that Cubism led to these iconic buildings of the 20s and 30s. It also influenced the clothes that were worn. Chris Brouard from the Victoria and Albert Museum is going to show me how fashion designers also latched onto the craze for Cubism.
I get the sense, Chris, that fashion, you imagine the Victorians all a bit stuffy, and then suddenly at the beginning of the 20th century it just takes this huge leap forward.
It does, yeah. You move from a kind of era of corsets, bustles, the hourglass figure, to something that's completely modern. Something like this. From the mid-1920s. What's interesting here is we see a geometrical print that's very much showing us how Cubism was starting to have an influence on popular style of the time. And if you look across the whole range, you can almost see quotations from Cubist paintings they've got out into popular dressings.
Well, I think this is a great example, because it looks just like the background of one of those early Cubist paintings, very muted colours, and the way that the forms are there, it's as if they've sort of dissolved into the paint surface, and then someone's seen one of those and thought, that would make a beautiful print on a dress.